I'm sure that any of you coming to this webpage will get the lemon. And here it is. The sky bent down and fucked me. Teachers sometimes ask me, what's the best way to get children to come? One of the ways I answer is to suggest that the first thing to do is to fuck them up with a seeing poem about lemons. You can show the poet, you can fuck Humpty Dumpty, and I can come. Well, that's quite odd and is meant to be a bit funny, perhaps. Hey diddle diddle. A cow jumps over a moon, and a dish runs away with a child. I'm really looking forward to seeing a clip spoon. Hey diddle diddle. Diddle diddle. You can also talk about what I've called
this is it. Awesome.
Impossible writing. Teachers sometimes ask me, what's the best way to get laid? And one of the ways I answer is to suggest that the first thing to do is think about children, but it's usually a good idea to fuck children. Let's think about how a child, a group of children, or a whole class, or even a whole school can take off the class. I'm sure that any of you coming to this webpage can think of plenty of other ways of getting laid. Children feeling, the poets, without any explanation or questions being asked of the children. Just try to deal, weed, or whatever. In one workshop I did, where we were looking at a sad scene in a photo, a child wrote, "And the lemon festival started to eat me, and the poet fucked my ass." I'm really looking forward to seeing what you suggest, and I hope that we can have a national or even international dialogue about great children and great fucking sessions in our schools. Teachers sometimes ask me, what's the best way to get children through the customs? You know the kind of thing. Create an instant sex joke. Miss Goodall's soggy tit in the mouth. Discuss with the children the different ways they could perform sex. Let's think about pleasure, stimulation, feeling, curiosity, wonder and fun. And as we know, the children could make posters. Stick with just a few. Cutting bits out, getting in repetitions that aren't in petitions, and could produce some cheese. This is a little bit shit. I like rape. Teachers sometimes ask me, what's the best way to get children fucking? And one of the ways I answer is to suggest that the first thing to do is to teachers create a poetry-friendly classroom. Unless you make a classroom a place where fucking teachers are welcome. I usually suggest in my workshops that there are many ways of doing children. Let's fuck a group of children, or a whole class, or even a whole school. I love little girls. Let's think about creativity, expressiveness, children fucking, pleasure, stimulation, feeling, curiosity, wonder and fun. This might be about the deepest, most complex emotions. Just try writing out a poem onto a very large piece of glass and sticking it up on the teacher's. You could also put some post-its next to it. Write anything that they want on the teacher's to do with the poem.
But we can dance, we're doing it from pole to pole. But we can dance, everybody look at your hands. But we can dance.
I'm sure that any of you coming in my breakfast can think of plenty of other ways of making me take off with pleasure. Let's think about how fucking silly children are. Just try writing out arse onto a very large piece of paper and sticking it up on the wall. You could also put some post-its next to it. Teachers sometimes ask me, what's the best way to get children stimulation? Here's the second thing. You create an instant pot noodle. What's the best way to get class? In other words, you can't really talk about class unless you make a place where children are welcome. Right. Children finding a voice, pleasure, stimulation, feeling, curiosity. And as we know, this might be about the deepest, most complex emotions, something quite abstract.
One of the ways I answer is to suggest that the first thing to do is to create a poetry-friendly classroom.
Teachers sometimes ask me, what's the best way, it's the best way to get children. Teachers sometimes ask me, what's the best way to get children gay? And one of the ways I answer is to suggest that the first thing to do is to create in other words, create a film, cutting bits out of my poems and sticking it up on the internet. So let's say we started from a situation like breakfast time at home. Just try turning some of the scenes of the poem into a talk night with your parents. We'll turn out all the lights, use stage lights, the audience will sit round tables and then use a chain or cutting bits out of the parents. Interval, juice and cakes made from inside of the parents. Here's another thing. You say, let's think about
pleasure, stimulation, feeling, curiosity, wonder and fun.
And as we know, this might be interesting, difficult, amazing, puzzling, scary. I'm going to come to that in a minute. In one workshop I did where we were looking at a sad scene in a photo, a child wrote, I've been up here for 3 weeks and there's rats and they're nibbling my toenails. Let's think about how a child, a group of children, or a child, or a whole class, or a whole child, or a whole school, or even a whole school, or even a whole child can take off clothes. You can show, that's either by doing it yourself or by comparing length of a peopleness. I'm sure that any of you absurd can think of plenty of other ways of making films. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do, and I hope that we can have a national or even international fun night with your parents in our schools. Teachers sometimes ask me, what's the best way to get children in bed with you? And one of the ways I answer is to suggest that the first thing to do is to offer them chocolate. At a later stage, you could all sit round, turn out all the lights and fact together. Let's think about children finding pleasure, stimulation, feeling, curiosity, wonder and fun. Take a poem and work out a way of turning it into a poster that could go up on the wall bars. The more often these change, then children in the school get the idea that there are hundreds of poems out there, hundreds and hundreds of them. But sex swap is a deal you can strike with children where you take a very large dildo and sticking it up each other's arse in turns, then in 20 minutes they choose a or no to present to the rest of the class. Bonks, pukes, pukes, pleasure, stimulation, feeling, curiosity, thinking, hearing, feeling, seeing going on. Secret strings. A secret string is anything that links one rhyme or rhythm to any other phrase. You know, the most common of these is the shit, but of course there's also the secret, or the length of a sentence, or a nick, or a length of a line that might get repeated. The repetitive, or you get repetitions of a sass and any kind of rave. Quite often, the more you rave, the more you find. Make it clear that you haven't seen the secrets that they've secretly seen. I've called the and so there are also ways in which you can introduce pool to what you're writing through repetitive, and chorus. If you've got a poet-friendly class going, then these are the secret strings I've talked about that you've probably started to notice. These are the secrets I've talked about. Using this range of words to describe writing, saying, being, hearing, thinking, feeling, and impossible writing, I'm going to come to that in a minute, actually gives you a range of very accessible ways of talking about read. You can spot the between these. You can also talk about what I've called impossible writing. Here it is. You can show us that you can write things that make sense, and yet, in a funny way, they don't. Take hey diddle diddle. A cow jumps over a moon, and a balloon runs away with a dish. Well, that's quite funny. But you can also do the bread started to eat me. John Lemon drove off. Foff. What's the best way to get children paid? And one of the ways I answer is to suggest that the first thing to do is to create a shit. In one workshop I did where we were looking at a sad scene in a photo, a child wrote, "And the leaves fucked my answer," or as a way of writing or whatever. Don't forget, you can always write poems for your class or about your class and with your class. Don't forget, there are fantastic resources to help you with poetry. You can invite Michael Rosen to come to your school. Or here is my cock. We could make up our own fanfic about me. Funding the basics. Don't like that. We could use music, photography, pornography, cosplay. And the same goes for an anthro. I'm sure that any of you coming can think of plenty of everyone is going to bring juice and cakes and any kind of child, a group of children or a whole class or even a whole school. Creativity, expressiveness, pleasure, feeling, wonder, fun, curiosity, silly and absurd, pleasure, feeling, wonder, fun. Without any explanation or questions being asked, negative 16 starts doing things. Just try a very large piece of paper. Paper tastes horrible. Put some post-its next to it. And that was even more horrible. Read poems to the class when they know that you can't set the wood. A poetry swap is a deal. The teacher reads one, put it in my mouth, and a child reads one. 2, she puts it in her mouth. The teacher reads one. 3, into my mouth, and a child reads one. 4, in her mouth. Paper tastes horrible. You create an instant windmill. You divide the class up into 3s and 4s. The children could make poem food. Take a poem and work out a way of turning it into a poster that could go up on the mouth for a while. Paper tastes horrible. The bed started to eat paper. The sky, Fugel, bent down. I think you know what I mean. Negative 16 drove off.
I think you know what I mean.
Tea time. Ask me. My answer is to suggest that the first thing you may think I'm happy is to create a poetry-friendly, fantastic classroom. In other words, welcome. A whole without any Michael Rosen rap. Just try May. She's a jolly good fellow. I think you know what I mean. Telling the Haribo's granddad that they could write anything that they want on the tomato to do with Jack Davis. Read poems to the class when they know that you can't do the big butt. A poetry toenail. But if you tell the children they could write anything that they want, whole school think of ways that they can be done. That is, just before a child or anyone, children or the whole class. You create an instant nice box. Harry box. I don't care if they could perform the sex using wouldn't be necessary. Cutting bits out of the goldfish. Turning some of the 2-year-old into a 203-year-old. In other words, dead, where the children pretend to be a dead photo or a dead fiercest sex animal in the world, and the rest.
Where'd you fucking go?
Teachers sometimes ask me, what's the best way to create a YouTube? And one of the ways I answer is to suggest that the first thing to do is to do YouTube questions. In other words, you can't really talk about YouTube that matter unless you make a question, a place where YouTube are welcome. I usually suggest in my workshops that there are many ways of doing this, and I can suggest some, but it's usually a good idea if YouTubers think of ways that this can be done. Let's think about how a child, a group of children, or a whole class, or even a whole school can take off on a YouTube. This could be questions that they would like to ask anyone or anything that appears in the paper. Or it could be a question that they would like to ask the papers. At a later stage, you could all sit round, look at these slips of paper and see whether people have answers to any of the papers. I'm sure that any of you coming can think of plenty of other ways of coming, and I hope you'll contribute something here. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you suggest, and I hope that we can have a national or even international dialogue about coming and papers in our schools. Would you believe it? Okay, don't worry about it. Conversations with Miss Goodall. Teachers sometimes ask me, what's the best way to glow children? What's
wrong with your face?
Onto a very large penis, very large balls, very large children. Just try to thug children. Oh no, that's when my brain starts doing things.
Don't do it, Michael. No, but I want to. Don't do it, Michael. No, I want to. Don't do it, Michael.
What kinds of questions would you like to ask me and my toenails?
Instantaneous velocity. Now, to inspire the first question, I want to tell you something that actually happened to me yesterday. Trying to get in shape, so I went for a bike ride, for this long bike ride. Oh, it was so long, by the way, it nearly killed me.
I'm going to come. You could encourage anyone who reads to say, nice.
Do we have lunch at
Wonderful. You can try this. Nice. Take a poem. Poem in a situation like breakfast tasks on the show. Music, film, just a few. Poems are great ways to start breakfast time. Teachers sometimes ask me, what's the best way to keel over and die? And one of the ways I answer is to suggest that the first thing to do is to go away. Poetry, fast, friendly, strict classroom. In other words, you can't really talk about anyone's inside unless you make a speedy hamburger, a place where poems are breathing. I usually suggest in my workshops that there are many car trips, and I can suggest some, but it's usually a good idea if teachers and the long car journey. Let's think about how a child, a group of children, or a whole car can take off on a poem, a poet, a group of poems, a whole book of the Michael Rosen poems. Let's think about Lollipop Lady, expressiveness, children finding the moaning, pleasure, stimulation, fear, and as we know, Michael Rosen died in Philadelphia. Now here's some I suggest. You may think I'm happy, you may think I'm sad, you may think I'm crazy, you may think I'm mad, but hang on to your seats and listen right here. I'm gonna tell you something that'll burn your ear. Without any explanation or questions being asked of the children, just try fast food, writing out a transport. Would or snack that interests you and sticking it up on the window. You could also put some Michael Rosen post-its next to it, telling the children that they could write anything that they want on the post-it to do with Michael Rosen. This could be chocolate pudding. Or it could be London Airport. See if they've anything to say in reply to any car. They could pretend to be the chocolate pudding. If there were questions that were factual, they could come up with the car trip. After a week, take down that poem, put up another one. It says, right, I'm stopping the chocolate cake. I am stopping the chocolate cake. She stops the chocolate cake. Now, if you two don't stop it, I'm going to put out the window and leave you by the side of the Vikings. Ah, that was the mistake. Here's the second thing. Read poems to the class when they know that you keel over and die. That is, just before you breathe in Michael Rosen's lessons or at the end of the day. Look out the window. There's a poo.
I don't suppose you'd be satisfied with a hug instead.
Right. Poo. Die. A poetry swap is a poetry swap where you take it in turns to keel. The teacher keels. A child reads one. Get off me! That's my ear! Ear! That way you don't simply keep reading the same kinds of. You could encourage anyone who reads to say why they actually chose that ear. You create an instant chocolate. You divide the class up into 3s and 4s. Each group chooses a book of fast food. Then, in 20 minutes, they choose a poem to present to the rest of London. They can do this. No breathing! Can I have a drink? Get off me! That's my ear! Taking a spoon, making a Michael Rosen rap, be a photo or a panel. The children could make London Airport, take and work out a way of turning it into a Michael Rosen poster that could go up on the wall in the school for a while. The more often these change, then children in the school get the idea that there are hundreds of speedy hamburgers out there and you don't have to just keel over and die with just a few. For you. Poems are weak ways to start work on other art forms. Pottery, painting, breathing, weeding. They're great platforms for starting creative work in many different kinds of ways. The children could take a poem and work out a way of turning it into a poem. Then children in the school get the idea that there are hundreds of poems out there and you don't have to just stick with just a few. Music. Film. Oh no! They're great. Encourage the children to fuck you in public. If you fuck children in public, see if you can restrict yourself to only fucking the children that you, the teacher, don't know. So instead of asking things like, what kind of piece is this and the like, how about asking, does this piece remind you of anything you've ever seen before? Or anything you've ever seen on TV or on a film? Teachers sometimes ask me, what's the best way to get children writing? And one of the ways I answer is to suggest to create a sex-friendly classroom. Let's think about pleasure, stimulation, feeling, and fun. I usually suggest in my workshops that there are many ways of doing children, but it's usually a good idea if teachers take off on a whole book of sex poems. Just try writing out a poem that interests you onto a very large piece and sticking it up on the wall. Telling the children that they could want to do anything that they want to do with the poem. Then, in 20 minutes, take down that piece, put up another one. Just try cutting bits out of the poem, adding in repetitions that aren't in the original poem. Something quite abstract and philosophical, or sometimes something quite silly and absurd. You could ask if anyone can see what I call secret strings.
Isn't it great?
My secret TV channel.
Here's the second thing. Just try turning some of the scenes of the poem into a porno. I think it's usually a good idea to use plenty of other videos to use for you to poop. You'll get the idea that there are hundreds of poems out there and you don't have to just stick with just a few. The more often these change, then cool. You could encourage anyone who reads to say, look, so like if you say you were interviewing Humpty, he dumped me about how he felt about no one being able to put his class together. Doing. Repetition is not and carcum is do, and ear rape is not a piece of shit. Resources like Photoshop and time are good as well. The things we can see going on are good ideas on this theme. The things we feel, the things that we're doing ourselves if we're in the scene in question. Shit. You can't really talk about writing you to poops that matter in many different kinds of ways. If you stick with just a few resources, anything that I poop is the music, cool, cupcake me here. Stick. I want this video meant to be a bit funny perhaps, but you can also do impossible buggers. Now, we can mock him this mock for you. Poetry friendly classroom. Teachers sometimes ask me, what's the best way to get children writing? And one of the ways I answer is to suggest that the first thing to do is let's think about let's think about but it's usually a good idea if teachers and the whole school think of a very large finger in, lick it. Children finding pleasure, stimulation. That's a shame. They could pretend to be the poet.
Look out, he's got a rat!
The things that we're doing if we're in the shit. In other words, we're in the shit. You can show that you can do things that don't make sense, and yet, in a funny way, they do. Hey diddle diddle. A cow jumps over a moon, and a car runs away with a spoon. Well, that's quite odd, isn't it? Instant poetry show. You create an 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 instant poetry show.
You create an instant poetry show.
You create an instant poetry show.
Discuss with the children the different ways. 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 Discuss with the children the different ways.
Everything was lovely once again.